Let's get into the War of 1812, which was, because when we speak about the American Revolution, we tend to just only think about 1776, but people forget that after that they continued fighting and made their way westward and into the South and into places like New Orleans, the Louisianas, and tried to take over these lands, take it away from the Americans. And the War of 1812 highlights this, how the British were still present even after the 1776 Declaration of Independence. We have a source here, guideslocal.gov, War 1812. It says, what was the War of 1812 fought about? So the War of 1812 was fought between the United States and Great Britain, primarily over the impressment of American sailors by the British Navy, as well as the disagreements over trade, western expansion, and Native American policy. The war ended inconclusively after 3 years of fighting. So a 3-year war that started in 1812 against Britain after the American Revolution. So despite the United States declaring independence in 1776, they were still fighting the British years later, 30 years, 40 years later. And the War of 1812 highlights that. Here's another source, battlefields.org, a brief overview of the War of 1812, American Battlefield Trust. It says, why was the Battle of 1812 important? So the War of 1812 brought the United States onto the world stage in a conflict that ranged throughout the American Northeast, Midwest, and Southeast, into Canada, and onto the high seas and Great Lakes. The United States went to war against Great Britain. Let's not forget, it was Britain who were oppressing and were the masters over the Americans. So let's get into how Hispaniola was involved in this War of 1812, particularly in the Battle of New Orleans. Came across this channel on YouTube, Chalmette Battlefield of New Orleans, War of 1812, Andrew Jackson's Rise, Project Pass. Now this video highlights a series of plaques and information boards that are located in Louisiana highlighting the War of 1812. And here is a freeze frame of one of those plaques regarding the War of 1812. And I'm just going to highlight how the regiments involve certain groups of people. Let's read. It says, the American line was defended by the 44th U.S. Infantry and by militia from Daquin's 2nd Free Colored Battalion, men who immigrated from Saint-Domingue because of the Haitian Revolution. So you have people who were fleeing or leaving the Haitian Revolution, but then joining militias in New Orleans. And here's another militia. The 1st Free Colored Battalion, positioned to the right, was descended from the city's colonial Spanish colored militias. Initially, what this plaque is saying is that the infantry, the people who fought on the side of New Orleans, defending against the British forces that were coming to attack and invade, one half of folks came from Santo Domingo, Saint-Domingue, folks who were fleeing the Haitian Revolution, and another regiment were the city's colonial Spanish colored militias. And so there were already a group of Spanish militia, colored Spanish militia, Morenos, who were already in New Orleans prior to the folks fleeing Hispaniola during the Haitian Revolution. I'm in this book, The Battle of New Orleans, written by Robert V. Rimini, page 27. It highlights a 1809 migration of Cubans and Dominicans, Santo Domingo, into New Orleans, including mulattoes, Creoles, and free people of color. You had some Spanish Americans, you had some mulattoes, and also from Cuba and Santo Domingo and the West Indies. Notice it says Santo Domingo and not Saint-Domingue. So let's go down. Let's see what else we could find in this book. Page 37, free men of color in Louisiana, loyal to Spain. So Louisiana, New Orleans, had a long history of people loyal to Spain and the Spanish cause and the Spanish crown. And at page 124, it highlights how one of the lines in New Orleans during the War of 1812 was defended by a Luis Daquin's battalion of Santo Domingo, free men of color. So it keeps making the distinction here of Santo Domingo and not Saint-Domingue. Here's another source, New Orleans campaign of 1814 and 1815, relations to the Chalmette battlefield. Jerome Green, page 24, he speaks about some refugees from Santo Domingo, how they supplemented and complemented a formal Louisiana militia and contributed to some of the militias that were in Louisiana that were defending against the British attacks. Again, highlighting that the use of the word Santo Domingo and not Saint Domingue. Let's go to an official source of the U.S. military. USArmy.com, Black Americans, U.S. Army. Many black soldiers fought in the Battle of New Orleans. Slaves as well as free black soldiers constructed forts around the city in preparation for the impending British invasion. Also, blacks comprised of the majority of 2 battalions and 3 companies, collectively referred to as free men of color, as well as serving in an integrated Louisiana militia units. When General Andrew Jackson, a future U.S. president, declared martial law in New Orleans in late 1814, he requested volunteer slaves from Louisiana and surrounding states to erect defenses for the city. Approximately 900 blacks dug a massive trench and earthen barricades at the Rodriguez Canal that provided vital in the outcome of the ensuing battle. So it talks about how some of these free people of color came who were already in Louisiana, who dug up this trench that served as a fort defending line against the British, and the canal was called the Rodriguez Canal in New Orleans. Let me read on. Most of the soldiers in the free men of color units were refugees from Haiti and Santo Domingo. So here we have several sources making the distinction between Haitians or Haiti and Santo Domingo, making the distinction between Haitians and Dominicans who were leaving Haiti after the Haitian Revolution. And let me continue on in that sentence because it has some good information. It says most of the soldiers in the free men of color units were refugees from Haiti and Santo Domingo, and 28 of them were Choctaw Indians. So here you have, in the War of 1812, which lasted until 1815, in New Orleans, being attacked by British forces. You have defending the city, you have a group of Haitians and Dominicans and Native Americans defending the city, digging out a canal they call the Rodriguez Canal to use as a fortifying line against the British. And just to summarize and recap what we have just learned, but before we do that, let me just summarize what we proved in part 1. That was that the Spanish people contributed to the American Revolution as individuals and as a nation, including arms, money, and over 60,000 Spanish soldiers, mariners, and hundreds of Spanish Armada warships, which mainly came from Santo Domingo and the Spanish West Indies. And as far as part 2, Battle of New Orleans, the War of 1812, which lasted for 3 years, was Britain's attempt to recolonize the 13 colonies after the Americans declared independence in 1776. One of these wars was the Battle of New Orleans in 1814, and we showed and proved how Santo Domingo and Cuba made major contributions in the 1814 Battle of New Orleans, including Spanish free people of color and mulattoes already in Louisiana. Just to kind of give my final thoughts, that when we read this information, we see that many of these authors and scholars and people who are providing this information are making distinctions between free blacks and free people of color, which is interesting. And when they use titles like free people of color, they're referring to folks from New Orleans who were present there, and not only that, folks who were arriving from places like Cuba and Santo Domingo, Hispaniola. And let's not forget that New Orleans was part of the Spanish crown, but it was actually governed from Cuba, not from Europe. So a lot of the things like the city layout and the administrators and the people who were the movers and shakers were coming from Cuba and were probably spent several generations in Cuba before arriving in New Orleans. You know, when we talk about New Orleans, we always highlight the French aspect and how the French came and settled, but a lot of lost history in terms of what the Spanish actually accomplished and did prior to the French arriving in New Orleans. And some of these quote-unquote Spanish were actually people from Cuba and Santo Domingo, people that we call Cubans and Dominicans today. Minimal Spanish acknowledgement, but no official recognition of Santo Domingo's contribution towards the American Revolution and the Battle of New Orleans. I mean, we read from some of these plaques and information boards that they have over in New Orleans highlighting the War of 1812, Battle of New Orleans, but we don't have anything official in terms of movies, documentaries, statues, formal acknowledgments in terms of this population of people who left Hispaniola, Santo Domingo, and devoted themselves into helping the United States in defending New Orleans. So this has to be formally acknowledged by all. And lastly, I just want to point out one interesting fact here regarding this Rodriguez Canal. That is very interesting, that a battle that's taken place in the United States between the Americans and the British in Louisiana, known for a French occupation. But it's interesting that this canal, which according to the sources proved to be a vital piece in defending New Orleans, that it's named after one of the oldest surnames in Spanish history, Rodriguez. It begs the question, who named this canal Rodriguez Canal? Was there a presence of a family that had this surname in that area? But we'll get into that in future episodes. That's that, and this is the American Patriots of the Spanish West Indies, Santo Domingo, Cuba, and the Spanish contributions to the American Revolution. I hope you guys enjoy this information, and hopefully you continue to support this channel. Until then, this is your brother David Rodriguez with another episode of Hispaniola History Channel. Good night. God bless.